Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Saturday, August 15th, 2026, and you're listening to Alex's News. It is a pleasant day in Riverside, with a high of 88 degrees and a low of 65.1 degrees, so it should be a comfortable day to spend some time outside. On today's episode, we are investigating the mysteries surrounding covert CIA activities near the Galapagos Islands. We will also examine the reasons causing significant financial aid setbacks for students within the California State University system. Beyond those major reports, we have a variety of other headlines to catch you up on, spanning from international developments to domestic issues impacting education. All that and more is coming up on Alex's News. Stay tuned. Good morning. This morning we're following a disturbing story about covert operations near the Galapagos Islands. Ethan, what have you learned?
Good morning, Grace. So according to the Washington Post, reports have emerged of a secret CIA program involving drone strikes, enforced disappearances, and torture. The targets were fishing vessels near Ecuador's Galapagos Islands. The Post cited an anonymous source and says these operations happened earlier this year. Importantly, they're described as distinct from the Trump administration's publicly acknowledged strikes in the Pacific and Caribbean.
So this is separate from the strikes we've heard about publicly. When did these covert incidents actually begin?
The earliest one we know of dates to January 20th, 2026, so about 7 months ago. That's when a fishing vessel named the Fiorella disappeared, along with its 8 crew members. The United Nations has since presumed the entire crew to be dead. It's a chilling starting point, because these were, on their face, ordinary fishermen, and no one came forward to explain what happened to them.
8 people, just gone. Were there other vessels attacked after that?
Yes, there were. In March, so about 5 months ago, 2 more vessels were attacked. Supplemental reports identify them as the Don Maca and the Negra Francisca Duarte II. And the broader picture is even grimmer. Democracy Now! Reports that since September, more than 200 people have been killed in U.S. strikes tied to these activities. That's a staggering number for operations almost no one knew about.
More than 200 people. Help us understand how these attacks were actually carried out.
The evidence points to a highly coordinated effort blending surveillance and force. Investigators say small quadcopter drones were used in the strikes, the kind with a range of just several miles. But before those drones hit, there was aerial surveillance. Flight data shows a surveillance plane, identified as Phoenix 701, flew from El Salvador toward the boats. So this wasn't random. Someone was watching those vessels closely beforehand.
Drones launched after a surveillance plane tracked them. What happened to the people who actually survived?
This is where the accounts get especially harrowing, Grace. Survivors of the March attacks told journalists they were approached by men on a blue ship. Those men wore khaki uniforms, carried long brown rifles, and primarily spoke English, aided by 2 Spanish interpreters. The survivors say they were then handcuffed, hooded, and tortured aboard that ship. These are first-hand testimonies, and they paint a picture of something far beyond a simple interdiction.
The detail about them speaking English stands out. Where were these survivors taken?
They were transported to the Salvadoran city of La Union, and then onward to San Salvador. And here's a key thread in the reporting. The ship used to pick up the crew of the Don Maca was reportedly a Salvadoran Navy vessel. So this wasn't just a shadowy operation on the open sea. There appears to be direct cooperation with Salvadoran forces, which raises real questions about who else knew.
So El Salvador seems deeply involved. What's the connection with that surveillance plane you mentioned?
Right, the Phoenix 701. Reports indicate it operated out of Ilopango Airport in El Salvador, and that aligns with long-standing agreements allowing the U.S. to use Comalapa Airport in El Salvador for aerial surveillance of drug traffickers. So there's an existing framework of cooperation the U.S. has relied on for years. What's alleged here is that infrastructure being used for something far more lethal than just watching for smugglers.
Let's talk accountability. Has any U.S. agency admitted responsibility for these strikes?
No, and that's a striking part of the story. No U.S. government agency has claimed responsibility. According to Just Security and Democracy Now!, the CIA declined to comment, and there was no official response from the U.S. State Department in the initial reports. So we have allegations of drone strikes, disappearances, and torture, and essentially silence from the agencies that would normally be involved. That vacuum is a big part of why rights groups are alarmed.
What about the Pentagon? Have they said anything about who these boats were carrying?
The Pentagon has claimed the targeted boats were carrying drugs. But Democracy Now! Notes an important caveat. The Department of Defense has provided no evidence to support those claims. So we have an assertion, but nothing to back it up publicly. And when you weigh that against survivor testimony of torture and the disappearance of 8 crew members on the Fiorella, the lack of evidence becomes very significant.
Without evidence, these become serious allegations. Who's pushing for answers right now?
Rights groups are leading that charge. The Times of Palestine has highlighted these allegations, noting that rights groups have accused the CIA of these undocumented military involvements. And that sparked broader scrutiny of U.S. counterterrorism practices across Latin America. So this isn't staying contained to one region or one incident. It's feeding a much larger debate about how the U.S. operates in the hemisphere and whether these actions cross legal and moral lines.
You mentioned the United Nations presumed the Fiorella crew dead. What weight does that carry?
It carries considerable weight, Grace. When the United Nations formally presumes a crew dead, it signals that international bodies are taking these disappearances seriously. It also shifts this from rumor towards something that could demand a formal accounting. The 8 crew members of the Fiorella weren't just lost at sea in an accident. Their disappearance is now linked, in these reports, to a covert campaign, and that changes the legal and diplomatic stakes entirely.
Let's return to the human side. What do those survivor accounts tell us that official statements don't?
They tell us the texture of what allegedly happened, the parts no press release would ever include. Survivors described being approached by men on a blue ship, men in khaki uniforms carrying long brown rifles. They described being handcuffed and hooded. They described being tortured. And the detail about 2 Spanish interpreters suggests the operators didn't speak the local language, which points back to foreign involvement. Those specifics are hard to dismiss, and they're what give this story its weight.
Why does the distinction between these covert strikes and the public ones matter so much?
It matters because the Trump administration has publicly acknowledged strikes on vessels in the Pacific and Caribbean. Those, at least, exist in the open, where they can be debated and scrutinized. But the Washington Post's reporting describes something separate and hidden, operations no one acknowledged at all. When strikes happen in secret, with no agency claiming them, there's no mechanism for oversight. That's the core concern here, Grace. Secrecy removes accountability.
Before we go, what should our listeners be watching for in the days ahead?
I'd watch for 2 things. First, whether the CIA, the State Department, or the Pentagon breaks their silence and offers any evidence for the drug trafficking claims. Second, whether international bodies, building on that United Nations presumption of death, push for a formal investigation. With more than 200 people reportedly killed since September, and vessels like the Fiorella, the Don Maca, and the Negra Francisca Duarte II named, the pressure for answers is only going to grow.
Ethan, thank you for walking us through such a difficult and important story.
Thank you, Grace. We'll keep following it as it develops.
Welcome back. This morning we're tracking a financial aid crunch hitting students across California. Tuition deadlines are looming, but many haven't even seen their award letters. Here to explain is our education reporter, Chloe. Chloe, good morning. What's happening?
Good morning, Grace. So right now, as of today, August 15th, some California State University students are still waiting on financial aid award notifications. That's a big deal because these letters tell students how much help they're getting toward tuition. And when those letters are late, families are left guessing whether they can even afford the semester. According to CalMatters, the delays have caused real anxiety as payment deadlines come and go.
That sounds stressful. So why are these notifications running so far behind?
It traces back to Washington, actually. According to CalMatters, the U.S. Office of Federal Student Aid updated its fraud protections back in April of 2025. That was in response to something called the One Big Beautiful Bill Act of 2025. Because of those changes, some universities got their federal data files 5 to 6 weeks later than they normally would. And when you're that far behind mid-cycle, everything downstream slows down too.
5 to 6 weeks is a long time. Is that kind of delay normal?
Not at all, and that's part of the concern. April Gramo of the CSU Chancellor's Office told Cal Matters that a delay like this, happening in the middle of the cycle, is, quote, very unusual, end quote. Normally these systems run like clockwork, so students have plenty of lead time. But this year, the timing collided with tuition deadlines, so students were essentially asked to commit money before they knew what aid was coming.
Now, delayed letters are one thing. Does that mean the money itself is also delayed?
That's an important distinction, Grace. The notifications and the actual disbursement of funds are governed separately. Federal rules prohibit any school from disbursing that money until within 10 days of the start of the academic year. So even in a normal year, students wouldn't get the cash early. What changed here is that students didn't even know the amounts they'd be receiving, and that uncertainty is what fueled so much of the frustration.
Let's talk about that frustration. Which campuses were hit hardest?
Cal State Fullerton stands out. According to Cal Matters, roughly 23,000 returning students there didn't receive their aid information until the Friday before the reporting period. That's an enormous number of people left in limbo. In response, Fullerton pushed its tuition deadline back from mid-July all the way to August 19th. And those students finally received their disbursements on August 12th, just a few days ago.
So Fullerton adjusted. Were other schools seeing the same anger?
Yes, and a lot of it played out publicly. Cal Matters reports that frustration bubbled up on Reddit from students at Cal State Northridge, Cal State Long Beach, and San Jose State. These are students venting because deadlines were passing and they still had no answers. Behind the scenes, financial aid staff have been working overtime to clear the backlog. But some of these schools remain short-staffed, which only makes the wait longer.
When deadlines pass and you still owe tuition, can students actually get dropped from their classes?
That's the fear, and it's a fair one. But officials are pushing back hard on that worry. Joe Nino of the California State Student Association, along with the CSU Chancellor's Office, confirmed to Cal Matters that provisions are in place so students won't be dropped from classes simply because of these FAFSA delays. In other words, the system isn't going to penalize you for a backlog that isn't your fault. The challenge has been making sure students actually hear that message.
And how are campuses getting that reassurance out to students?
At Cal State Fullerton, they leaned on the platforms students already use. Sydney Yee from Fullerton's student government told Cal Matters the campus used Instagram and email to communicate these protections. That matters because a scared student scrolling their phone is more likely to see an Instagram post than an official memo. April Gramo also explained the mechanics of it. She said that when a, quote, drop hold, end quote, is lifted, the student is then considered to be in good financial standing.
So if you did everything on time, are you in the clear?
Largely, yes. Gramo noted that students who met the March 2nd priority deadline were not affected by these delays. So the earliest, most on-time filers mostly avoided this whole mess. The students caught up in it often had other factors at play. According to Cal Matters, individual delays can also stem from summer applications, financial audits, low academic performance, or a sudden change in family income.
That's helpful context. Let's zoom out. Is there a bigger financial squeeze on these families?
There is, and it's tied to federal policy again. A 2025 federal law lowered the borrowing caps for both parents and students, so even families who want to borrow their way through a gap may find they can't borrow as much as before. That said, there's a silver lining worth mentioning. According to Cal Matters, roughly 65% of Cal State undergraduates actually graduate without any loan debt at all.
65% debt-free. That's encouraging. Is there another story developing alongside this one?
There is, and it's a separate but related pressure on these same campuses. Good Goblin reports that a Department of Justice ruling declared 3 federal STEM diversity programs unconstitutional. Those programs were administered by the National Science Foundation. So we're talking about federally backed efforts to broaden who participates in science and technology fields, and now they've been struck down.
What did those programs actually pay for?
Quite a lot, as it turns out. According to Good Goblin, the terminated programs represent roughly $104 million in funding. That money supported research scholarships, faculty diversification grants, and summer bridge cohorts. Summer bridge programs are those that help incoming students get ready for tough college coursework before the year even starts. So this is money that touched students at multiple stages of their education.
And where does that loss land the hardest?
It falls particularly heavily on Hispanic-serving institutions here in California, according to Good Goblin. Those are colleges that enroll a large share of Hispanic students, and many of them are within or connected to the Cal State world. So when you stack it up, you've got delayed aid letters on one side and terminated support programs on the other. For a lot of these students, both stories hit the same doorstep.
So bringing it back to right now, what should a worried student do today?
The clearest guidance from officials is don't panic and don't assume the worst. The Chancellor's Office and the California State Student Association have both stressed that students won't be dropped over these FAFSA delays. If you're at Fullerton, remember that tuition deadline was moved to August 19th, so there's a little breathing room. And staying plugged into your campus email and social channels is genuinely the best way to catch these updates as they come.
And for families still waiting on their money?
The key thing to remember is that federal timing rule. No school can release those funds until within 10 days of the academic year starting, so a wait isn't necessarily a red flag. Fullerton students, for example, saw their disbursements land on August 12th. If you filed by that March 2nd priority deadline and you're still hearing nothing, that's the moment to call your financial aid office directly. They're working overtime, but they can tell you exactly where your file stands.
Is there any sense of when this all gets back to normal?
The delays were essentially a one-time ripple from those federal fraud protection updates back in April of 2025. Once the backlog clears, the cycle should return to its usual rhythm. The bigger, longer-term questions are really about that lowered borrowing cap and the loss of those STEM diversity programs. Those are policy shifts, not paperwork delays. So their effects will play out over years, not weeks. That's the part educators are watching most closely.
Really important reporting. Chloe, thank you so much for walking us through all of it.
My pleasure, Grace. And I just remind students to keep checking those official channels, because the situation is still moving.
Great advice. That's education reporter Chloe, and we'll keep you posted as the semester gets underway. We'll be right back. Here are some other headlines. Waking up to a shaky start in Indonesia, where a magnitude 7.7 earthquake rocked the Flores region on Saturday, August 15, 2026, at 5:58 a.m. local time. The ground really broke the ice for a disaster, with the epicenter located 42 miles north-northwest of Ende. The National Disaster Management Agency reports that 38 people have been killed, including 16 who were caught in a landslide in the village of Riok. It has been a real cliffhanger for survivors, as 13 others are hospitalized. The quake left buildings in Sika, Manggarai, and East Manggarai in shambles, and the roof of an assembly hall at St. Peter Major Seminary simply gave up the ghost. Meanwhile, landslides have cut off the 700-kilometer Trans-Flores Highway, leaving travelers in a real jam. While a tsunami warning initially had everyone on edge, officials later lifted it after the sea decided to stay in its place. Rescue efforts are now in full swing with 3 helicopters and a vessel on the scene, though 2,000 villagers in Nagakeo have had to flee to shelters. Police Chief Rudy Darmoko says power outages and communication blackouts are making the rescue mission a real dark spot in the operation. Turning to the Middle East, things are heating up in the Strait of Hormuz. The UAE's ADNOC announced that 2 of its vessels were attacked, and the UK Maritime Trade Operations Centre reports a drone strike on an oil tanker. While no one was injured, the attack certainly sparked a fuel-ish reaction in the markets. Brent crude futures climbed $1.45 to $88.52 a barrel, while West Texas Intermediate rose $1.15 to $82.40. It was a high-octane week for investors, with weekly gains reaching nearly 6% for Brent and 5.4% for WTI. In legal news, a family has found a silver lining in a dark cloud. The Wilkes-Barre Citizens. Voice reports that the wife of a United States soldier was removed from a deportation flight and released from federal immigration custody. It seems she managed to land on her feet just in time. Finally, we have a brief mention of some mounting legal and medical challenges regarding President Trump's new vaccine plan, though the details on those disputes remain under the needle for now. That is all for our secondary headlines this morning. Stay tuned for your weather and traffic reports. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Opus 4.8, Gemini Pro 3.1, Gemini Flash 3, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.